How do you label the villain in a story? What are some defining characteristics? When I first think of a villain, I think of something dark, or someone who you're leaning against to follow along the story. But in the text we have read this year, we have learned to adjust our way of thinking about the villain. Today, we will discuss the villains of the text we have read this semester. Welcome to the Villains Come In podcast with visuals, and I'm your host, Maya Castro. On today's episode, we will be discussing my villain project. In the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of a villain is 1. A character in a story or play who opposes the hero. 2. A deliberate scoundrel or criminal. Or 3. One blamed for a particular evil. This year, we have read many interesting texts that display strong messages about society as a whole, or looking into a specific time period like the Renaissance, the Harlem Renaissance, or the Modernism era. However, not all of these texts have a physical, tangible villain, or maybe a more abstract idea that acts as a villain. So, for my villain project, I depicted my conclusions in a one-pager. I first wrote villain in purple because I feel like villain strikes a more darker tone. First of all, I have the American flag representing the American dream, which is shown in The Great Gatsby, which we have read, where Gatsby is able to climb up to his American dream, where he is rich and wealthy from being a poor little farm boy. However, there are limitations and obstacles within the American dream, which relates to the crystal stair, which I have above the word villain. The crystal stair is an allusion in Mother to Son. It had tacks in it and splinters. The mother quotes, "I's been climbing on, so boy, don't you turn back now." She is explaining to her son that she's had to climb up the crystal stair with obstacles in her way to still reach where she has been. So she doesn't want her son to take any more back steps because she knows it's very possible to still keep continuing to climb even though it's super hard. And this is a very motivating message towards her son. And I feel like the villain in this scenario is just society as a whole because she has to climb up this staircase with a bunch of obstacles in it, when on the other hand, most likely white people don't have the same obstacle. This also relates to the racial mountain, which I drew here in the Negro artist in the racial mountain, because this also has the same concept of trying to reach the top, but it's still very hard. The author in this text wants specifically his main audience towards Black people to embrace themselves. He uses a lot of examples of other very important people in the Harlem Renaissance who maybe internalized their racism. Also, another theme in that text is the idea of having to deal with the white American standards, which makes it hard for Black people to climb up the mountain, which I already have a big in comparison to these little people, white man who is already at the top of the mountain because he doesn't have to go through that, which is same with the American dream, because I think that's also can be portrayed as a villain because it makes life harder for other people. Also in the racial mountain, there's a quote, "We build our temples for tomorrow, strong as we know how, and stand on top of the mountain free within ourselves," which is very motivational, which is the whole mountain metaphor and trying to climb up at the top of the mountain. But also, not only with climbing up the mountain, just wherever you end off for the next generation so they can stay at that point and not have to keep taking steps backwards. And also back to the internalized racism, there's a quote in the beginning of it where it says, "Urge within the race towards whiteness," which also is a villainous factor in society because we feel as African Americans we have to stand up to these white standards because white people will see us as gross or maybe ghetto because we have different hair textures and we have to take care of our bodies a little bit differently than some white people do. And so the author in this is trying to show that it is okay to be ourselves, in which I think is very important. Also within the mountain, I drew this mixed person showing half white and half Black because they also have to deal with struggles between being in the middle and not maybe fitting in with the Black side or the white side, which I still very common in today's society because you have to deal with black side and white side, but sometimes you're not accepted in both. And the dad in this is not accepting of his son at all. He doesn't even claim him. And back to the man that I drew on top, this also connects to the man in Hills Like White Elephants, because the girl has to deal with the situation of life or death, and she has to choose between the baby or the abortion, and abortions are very high death rate at this time period. Another theme back in Gatsby is time, and Gatsby is very obsessed with time and trying to go back in time to meet again with Daisy, but that sets him back, which also relates in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, because he also states there will be time, which he says multiple times, because he's also holding himself back, in which I think he is a villain himself, holding himself back. Also, I have the Feminist Manifesto by Mina Loy, and women rights and women is the equal of man, which I think is a very important quote, because she's trying to fight for women's rights and reproductive rights, because that's very important and it's starting to evolve in the modernist era. This also plays a role in the limitations within the American dream, because women are also just seen as just stuck in the house and do all the work for the men, but they can't be their own person. And finally, I have In a Station of Metro and The Weary Blues, because I feel like they both have very depressing tones, which I feel like can also play down to this sad character who can be the villain. And this also deals with alienation and isolation, which I feel like are both very defining characteristics of both of these texts. Thank you for listening. Bye.